can never tell if a movie's going to do well or not.
We knew it was a good idea, but no one knew you had a phenomenon.
A love letter to our common condition and to New York.
Ivan decided to add 100 shots.
The date that it's going to open is in like 3.5 weeks.
You never know in this business how long something's going to last and whether it's just going to be a trend, a fad, or have some enduring impact. And certainly, as we see today, it does.
You know, I had a kind of feeling that it was unique.
In America, something very unexpected happened. Indiana Jones was outstripped at the box office by a picture called Ghostbusters.
It's all the more surprising when you realize that Steven Spielberg had nothing at all to do with it.
That kind of comedy with those kind of special effects.
To quote Variety again, gags and special effects scare pick misses its mark. Well, I certainly wouldn't go along with that. It hits its mark all right and turned out to be the biggest jackpot of the year.
And that crew that was so hot at that time.
Did you expect Ghostbusters to be as popular as it was?
Yes.
When that came out, suddenly I was famous.
I think anybody would have to be very arrogant and say, I'm going to do more than $200 million when only 5 films had done that previously.
So it gives you some idea of how major a phenomena it was, and then repeat it in subsequent summers.
This was a real movie.
No one had done a comedy on that scale before.
I didn't even know what a BAFTA award was.
Ghostbusters.
I don't know about winning. I didn't think I was going to win.
Sorry if I'm not as calm as some of the other winners.
It always seems like it goes to the other guy, you know?
I think we fully believed that we were going to carve out a little niche in film history.
It all starts with this gentleman, Dr. Samuel Augustus Ackroyd, my great-grandfather, who was a dentist in Kingston, Ontario. Great-grandfather Sam, as well as being a dentist, was a psychic researcher in the tradition of the British Psychical Research Society and the American Society of Psychical Research. And he, throughout his life, was interested in the survival of the consciousness, in mediumship, channeling afterlife voices, where the dead really are living in terms of a presence. You can go to Lilydale near Buffalo, New York, and my great-grandfather was the reviewer of all the psychic acts that rolled through town, whether it be a channeler, a mediumship, whether it be a precipitated painter like the Bang Sisters or the Campbell Brothers. And every Sunday, these big black cars would pull up, and men and women all dressed up would come just like Sunday to church. There was an impresario, my great-grandfather. There was a showman, Mr. Ashurst, who became the family medium. He was a gifted medium, really, really gifted. He could speak in Chinese and Hungarian, and he made trumpets fly around the room. So my great-grandfather watched, and he wrote about them, whether they were genuine hoaxes, whether they were appealing or not. And we found a trunk full of his letters. So his letters, his journals were always in the family when I was growing up. And after I made my living in comedy, I thought, why not mix the real world of psychic research using the real work of Dr. Roll and the Maimonides Dream Lab and Duke University's Parapsychological Department, and use what was really going on in the science in terms of researching whether there is survival of the consciousness and whether there are, in fact, such things as materializations and apparitions, and, you know, take that jargon and that knowledge and make it good old-fashioned ghost comedy.
We don't believe in ghosts. Or do I?
The property got the enthusiasm first of Bernie Brillstein, my agent, God rest his soul. There's a voice I would like to hear from the past. How you doing, kid? Hi, kid. Hi. Also got the enthusiasm of Michael Ovitz, the famous agent who founded CAA. Those two guys looked at this and said, this is, you know, we really have something here, so let's package it the right way and get the right people involved.
Ghostbusters started as this sort of very famous treatment that was written by Dan Aykroyd.
I know Ivan from years ago. He hired me as an announcer on at a television station in the 70s in Toronto, so I know him for many years, and the fact that Harold Ramis had worked with him.
The concept was so strong.
He had written it in the early 80s, and it was set in 2012, I think.
It was a much different kind of movie. Danny always imagined John Belushi and he being part of this sort of science fiction movie.
Eddie Murphy, myself, and John were supposed to be the original Ghostbusters.
You know, that took place in outer space sometime in the future.
For a variety of technical reasons, there was a hole torn in our reality envelope. This is all in a little prologue.
We ripped the fabric of our dimension with the EMF waves. That was the original premise of the first movie, that all this electronica around us is yielding a rift in the interdimensional veil between our dimension and the next one.
And that ghost energy had flooded into New York City, giving rise to a new profession, Ghostbusters.
I was working with Ivan, and Danny Aykroyd sent over a script, which was very long. My memory is that there were a lot of Ghostbusters, and they were sort of like plumbers.
Can't believe I work for a company called Ghostbusters.
Sort of a blue-collar job.
And the team in the movie was just one of many Ghostbuster units, and he thought of us as like the Orkin men.
To control your pest, Orkin is best. Call out to the Orkin band.
We'll just show up, this marked truck, and exterminate the ghosts and leave.
At the Proton Packs, had a Marshmallow Man. Mind you, it was one of 50 large illusions.
Which necessitated the Ghostbusters traveling interdimensionally into another world. And that other world would be entirely a world of special effects. Like the whole last third of the movie was one huge special effect.
This was sort of this extravaganza that he had concocted.
Ghostbusters. Danny came to meet him, and they went to Arts Deli.
I said to him, Dan, there's a great idea here, but I really think it should take place today. In a contemporary times, it should be in a real city on Earth, i.e. New York. All this fantastic stuff will be much more impressive set against the reality that we knew.
But also it seemed like the real comedy heart of the film was in the juxtaposition of these ghost janitors taking the supernatural and making it completely mundane and setting it in a place as grounded and gritty as New York City.
But that basic idea, that wonderfully brilliant idea was there.
Ivan had known me since the Lampoon days. Ivan said to Dan, why don't we get Ramis? You guys can rewrite the script and he can play one of the Ghostbusters. And since John had passed away, Dan had developed a friendship with Bill Murray, starting way back when Bill and I were in the Lampoon together.
We said, we got to get Murray in on this, and we got to give it to Murray. We got to give him the lead and let him be the greatest romantic lead that the world has ever seen. And he did do that for us. He pulled it off.
I was having a pretty good time with the studios. My first 3 movies were Animal House, Meatballs, and Stripes. I called up the head of Columbia Pictures, and I said, Frank, I have this great idea. It's going to have Bill Murray and Dan Aykroyd. It's called Ghostbusters. I want to bring Harold Ramis in as a star as well, and as a co-writer with Danny. He said, well, come on in and tell me about it. And literally a half hour after this conversation began, he said, well, how much do you think it'll cost? And I had no idea what it was cost, and I just picked a very big number.
I remember Ivan holding it up and saying,
I think we can do it for about $30 million. He said, you have $30 million as long as you can deliver it by June of 1984. And this was about May 1983 when this conversation took place.
We sort of gulped and said, sure, maybe, yeah, sure.
What we were facing suddenly was here in May of 1983 was having to write the screenplay, basically find an effects house who could actually pull the visual effects off and, cast it and put it together. And we had really we had to reconstruct a script from scratch. We went to Martha's Vineyard together, Harold Ramis and Dan Aykroyd and I and our respective families.
Dan had a house on Martha's Vineyard. He and John Belushi, when they'd gotten successful, each bought a house on the vineyard. And driving up, when you hit the edge of his property, there's a military checkpoint. I remember there was a barrier that came down, and it was painted in our military colors and everything. And up at his house, he said, well, let's work in the basement, which was painted camouflage. The whole basement was camo.
And so we would meet in the basement every day from about 11 o'clock in the morning till about 7 or 8 o'clock at night, and then go back to our families who were having a great vacation.
When you have a great idea, when you really know what you're doing and you feel confident about it and you're laughing yourself and it feels really fresh, I'm not saying these things write themselves, but there's just a real easy flow to it. So our first draft together was written in relatively short amount of time.
And we just basically pounded the script out over a 2-week period.
Very exciting and very entertaining to play in that area, as we did.
And it was so much fun, and it was so funny. But we had one of the first big changes, which Ivan and I came to quite independently, was that we wanted the audience to experience the journey from skepticism to belief, because I'm a skeptic, and I thought, well, if I were this character, I'd need to be convinced that these things were real. And no one had any conception yet of who those Ghostbusters were, because Dan's script was very technical and very abstract. So if you'd read it at the time, you wouldn't see much differentiation or real specific personality among the Ghostbusters. So the fact that they were kind of really neutral was good, because it allowed us to put our own character imprint over each of them.
You know, most scientists and physicists from the 30s and 40s and 50s, you know, a lot of them were Germans and Swiss. So, you know, Spengler, Stantz, and Venkman seem to be, you know, Swiss and German Americans. Americans, though, please, absolutely, new countrymen.
Ivan one day turned to me and said, what if the Ghostbusters were college professors? And I said, hey, I get that. I used to teach at the university. I understand what that would be like. That's a great idea.
So instead of making them just janitors or the guys who come and get the termites out of your basement, we thought we'd make them scientists.
Gosh, man, I'm a scientist.
Bill's specialty was kind of psychology, and Dan was really into the ghost stuff. And I was a theoretical physicist. And we've been hoping to see something real, and it seemed like a great way to start, by seeing that first real manifestation and the way we experienced it, and then providing practical explanations and creating the business. It looked like it was going to be funny, and beyond that, it looked like it was going to be really fun to do.
I think we'll take it.
Good.
You know, I was just looking for the very best people that could deliver this movie that was much bigger than anything I had done in the past.
I was already working for Ivan. My first film was Heavy Metal, and he came to trust me as a producer. And I was teamed with Joe Metchok, and we made a good team, focusing on different areas. But most of my focus in Heavy Metal was design and animation.
A trip beyond the future to a universe you've never seen before.
Well, by the time Ghostbusters came around, because animation and special effects are often...
And we actually, as a result, began working on special effects while the guys were still writing the script.
Ivan was making a comedy first, not an effects movie. So getting the effects work together was difficult in this time period, because Ivan was promising it in almost half the time that anyone at that time was spending on a special effects movie. We had never done a special effects movie, and there was no special effects house in town who could take it on.
What we did was we went to Richard Edlund, who'd been at ILM. We knew he wanted to set up his own company.
I was in hospital getting a back surgery after just having lost a project with Ridley Scott that had gone to England. I got a call from Don Shea first, and then Michael Gross to do Ghostbusters. Within a day of that, I'd gotten another call from Peter Hyams to do 2010.
He already had an Academy Award, and he already had the skills. 2 studios kicked in the cash, built a studio, including building some cameras from scratch.
So it was very funny. Whenever we were visiting, they'd cover up all the stuff for 2010.
I'd worked for Richard on Poltergeist and then Return of the Jedi. The work on that film, he had asked, you know, I'm going to start a company. Would you like to join me? Which was, of course.
They rented a space down in Marina Del Rey, and Michael hired a lot of conceptual artists and comic book artists to start drawing ghosts.
And because of my history with heavy metal, I said we could do the same thing here. Let's tap resources that have no film history, and then we'll figure out if they can be implemented for film. And on top of which is a comedy. So, should there be funny ghosts? We just have these drawings and concepts come into Ivan and say, no, not that way, no, not that way, look at this way. And then we'd bring in the effects people and say, if we went further with this, how would you make it a reality? So implementing those was very much my job.
I mean, the first thing I was trying to do was to build the technology up real quick so that we could actually produce the movie. And I had made a deal with Doug Trimble to take over a studio in LA, which had a lot of 65 millimeter equipment, but it was just kind of laying around, and it was like a parts bin.
Right.
And so I had to bring in engineers, machinists,
The animation department was basically just a big warehouse. Gary and I were literally building, and with Thane and the guys were building tables at night and shelves and animation discs, and Gary's computer, the camera wasn't computerized, it's giant Oxberry. I mean, it was like he said, it was just parts.
And while the lawyers were skirmishing, we had only 10 months to go until release. And at that time, in '83, it was budgeted at $5 million for visual effects, which was a really big effects budget in those days. And we were working with incredible talents like John DeCure, who was like one of the great production designers of all time, and Laszlo Kovacs, who became my lifelong friend.
Well, Laszlo is a dream. He was a wonderful, wonderful man. Very kind, very generous. Came over here in the Hungarian Revolution in 1956 and has a warmth about him that's irreplaceable.
We got started before we were supposed to start shooting. We said, let's go to New York and do some scouting.
I remember the first day was technically a pre-production day because I was trying to get decent weather in New York City and Manhattan. Our official start of principal photography was the end of October. I thought, well, let's do a few days of pre-production shooting. While we have most of the cast and crew around anyway, we're doing costume fittings, we're doing rehearsals, people are going out and buying equipment, and the designers setting up. Let's just get out on the street and do some stuff.
Someone's doing a stand-up newscast on the street, and there's a guy behind them playing with his beard. And I think that was the first thing we shot.
The first day shooting was a car crash because some skeleton-like ghosts have taken over a taxi cab, and so we did the stunt the very first day shooting.
The animatronic cab driver wasn't even done at Boss Film. It was basically my audition. It was when I met Tredelin and all the higher-ups at Boss Film. They said, okay, we've got 2 weeks. We have to be in New York City on location filming a fully animatronic zombie cab driver. You go away and make it, and then go to New York and shoot it, and if it works, we'll give you the job. And so I really did everything on my own. I sculpted it, I did the engineering on it, I did the hair work, I did the paint, I did everything. And it went really well, and it was actually a lot of fun. And then they came back and they said, okay, now you have a year of torture ahead of you.
And part of that day of shooting, I said, well, let's get a shot for the montage when they get more successful.
I'd never worked in the heart of Manhattan. So there they were all set up, and I got into the jumpsuit for the first time and went out there, and wow, this is really cool. I mean, we kind of own the city.
So I'm busy sort of setting up some cameras, and I look up, and suddenly coming at me are the 3 Ghostbusters in full regalia. And it was such a startling image, and it was such an original image, and I just got this wonderful shiver down my back. It was just a great first moment on the movie.
I actually, in all honesty, had never really produced a movie before.
Here I am, associate producing Ghostbusters. I have never been on a movie set before, and because my first film was animated, I didn't entirely know how it all worked. I'm fessing up to this for the first time.
I remember at one point I was on the street with 300 extras yelling Ghostbusters, and I thought, I better learn to do this really fast.
And I came on the set having to pretend I knew everything, and it says producer, and I see my chair with my name, and I'm going, and I'm looking around, and I didn't know where to stand. I didn't know half their jobs. And somebody came to me and said, something has to be done. And they said, you better tell the first assistant director. We'll do that. And I had to find out how I could find out who and what a first assistant director was without letting on that I had no idea what I was doing.
Probably had I understood how big it was and how difficult it was, I would have been more frightened than I was because I'd never done it before. I thought, hey, this is what movies are like. You always have thousands of extras and special effects and a deadline to make.
I know more than one producer who never knew his ass from a hole in the ground. And I know there were people on that film who went, there's the asshole producer who doesn't know what he's doing. But fortunately, I got through it.
The very first note of music you hear is the blaze of light from the star. There was a revolutionary synthesizer being released at that time called a DX7, and it was the first fully digital synth. And the very first note is a factory programmed sound on this DX7. They're impossible to get. And we managed to procure one of these synthesizers. God only knows what had to happen.
Elmer Bernstein is a genius and did a beautiful job on the score.
That particular Ghostbusters theme that he wrote, you know, dum, bum, 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 was a style that he had been tinkering with. So because I had been along for the ride on a number of films, I got to see that particular style evolve into a full-blown thematic piece.
He created this very special classical sound for that broad comedy science fiction film that has this sort of very historical, romantic, full orchestra score to it. I don't think the movie would have worked without his score.
My introduction to this whole escapade was the audition.
Square.
And I looked to this side of me, and there's this actor chewing gum, just wildly chewing gum. And I was like, do you have any more gum? And he goes, yeah. Little did he know, he handed me the part.
I got the script and I read it and the ectoplasm and the whatever, and the Stay Puft Marshall. I kind of was like, what the heck is this movie?
He called me in and we're doing the scene and the gum flies out of my mouth. And the whole room erupts in this thunderous laughter, but uncontrollable laughter. And I am biting my tongue so hard to not laugh. I am digging into some holy place within to not crack up because they're all laughing. I'm in tears.
The university is, as everyone now knows, is Columbia. We show all these Columbia landmarks, but Columbia wouldn't let us use the name.
I arrive and I'm looking around and I'm going, okay, there's the table, and I'm looking for, like, where's the electronic equipment to shock me?
I don't like this.
And I'm like, what the hell? What kind of budget film is this?
Got up that morning and knew we were shooting that day and went to the set, and I was dressed in just the clothes I'd worn, and they were like, oh, you look fine. Oh, you look great. No, you don't need your hair done. You don't need makeup. You don't need wardrobe. And I'm like, really?
I basically, like, pinched the hell out of myself every time that we had to do a shot. I go into the restroom, and I've basically got, like, the continent of Africa in purple all up my leg with a big blue River Nile vein going right through it.
So I've always wished I had blow-dried my hair better that day.
And Laszlo walks in, and he goes, good God!
It's amazing how many people remember me from being that librarian. But, I remember the real librarian came around, and she looked at me and she said, oh, they always make us look like that. Isn't that terrible?
We played with different openings for a while before we settled on the library opening. We played with different versions of that, all of which were promising and kind of funny, but the library was really good. And, I think I can take credit for that.
Hope we can clear this up quickly and quietly.
I was actually working in the New York Public Library on a writing project, and I looked up and saw Bill Murray and Ramis. They were scouting the location. And I remember looking at them and thinking, I wonder what they're doing here.
I know how I got it, too. It was my scream. I had a wonderful scream. They said, suppose a ghost were coming at you. What would you do? And I screamed. He laughed and said, okay, the part's yours.
The call time was about 5:30 in the morning, and I was in the makeup trailer with Bill Murray, who obviously had not been to bed. And what I told people about it was, and I swear this is true, they were much funnier. I mean, what was going on between those guys from the minute that you opened the door to the makeup trailer until, the end of the day was so hilarious. And that's almost intimidating that they were able to be that connected to each other. And of course, that's the relationship between the librarian and the Ghostbusters anyway.
The idea was we could only shoot in the morning before it really opened. And so we were supposed to be in from 6 to 10 for 2 days in a row. Ivan, who was really on a road, he completed all of that in the 4 hours. And then we went out and didn't know what to shoot. So we broke for lunch and then shot a scene we were supposed to shoot a couple of days later.
We shot the exterior first when we were in New York, and we used the reading room of the New York Public Library. So the scenes where we've just entered, and I guess Egon is, for some reason, under a table with a stethoscope, listening at a table for God knows why.
They were stopping traffic on Fifth Avenue to do this scene. And there was a guy who was like a street preacher who was praying all morning. He was like, he was standing on a soapbox, and he was going, "Oh, you Hollywood, you're going to hell. You're going to hell." And, the production had to go and pay him off.
And then you wait weeks to pick it up in Los Angeles, in the Los Angeles Public Library, which was us going into the private spaces of the library where the public is not allowed. And the movies always have that kind of discontinuity when you're shooting them.
And Ivan Reitman, of course, the director I met, when I was supposed to see the ghost for the first time, he's not a scary man. He was trying to scare me. So we just go like that.
Ivan's directions were simple and concise. Look scared and look more scared.
That's acting.
An awful lot of the effects in that sequence are practical effects. They aren't opticals.
Like the cards flipping out and the slime coming down the walls.
So the cards were actually sent off into the air by little air jets that were hidden in all the drawers. So the drawers opened and the air jets came on. Books going back and forth from shelf to shelf. Those were hung on wires.
When they find the vertically stacked books, that was an idea Ivan had on the way to work. I think Danny came up with the line.
Symmetrical book stacking, just like the Philadelphia mass turbulence of 1947.
I know. Do exactly as I say. Get ready. Ready? Go!
The librarian was a really interesting task because in one shot, and I guess ultimately it was supposed to be about 36 frames, a second and a half.
It's the first big scare of the movie, and I think it was imperative to have a good scare versus a comedic scare.
An old woman transforms into the most hideous, scary beast that any of us there can imagine. Like, okay, how do you do this? I'm like, I'll make a change-out thing. Take a replica of a human and actually put pneumatic devices in it and make it distort. Everything I did on that film, I wanted to walk a tightrope between utter failure and soaring success. So I thought, okay, I can try it my way and completely fuck it up or just not try it at all.
In ways, I was like a maitre d' at a restaurant, that it was my job to make sure everything went okay and that all of the people at the table had what they need to have a good time. I had to set up an environment where they could do the best work they could.
Most of what I did to start with was to build a mock-up. We had the foam latex skins, and I would take a simple PVC pipe and wood and sticks, glue and screws, and put something together with our first rough skins out of the mold, which were copies of the original actress.
I want her head to lower, I want her shoulders to raise, I want her deltoid to her bicep to elongate, from here to her wrist to elongate, fingers to grow. I want her mouth to get bigger. I want her head to flatten. I want her to do something, again, specifically 36 frame shot. I mean, come on, you're not going to get it if it's just going.
Rolling, do your bad thing.
Call the fence. As we're building it, I thought, we cannot control this. You're going to probably have to have 30 puppeteers. Yet, those 30 puppeteers have to hit their marks. When the director says action, for a second and a half, they have to do exactly, and that would never work. I knew that wouldn't work.
I actually had to go outside our group of people to get someone to mechanize.
And I said, look, here's our problem. I want all these things to happen. They have to happen really quickly, and they have to happen in tandem, in concert with the symphony.
The mechanic, John Alberti, gave him the mock-up and said, this is what Steve wants. You can see how far this pushes, how far that raises.
It has to be the way you and I work out for months ahead in advance. This has to change then, this has to trigger that, this has to do that.
And then he could then take measurements and then base his mechanical understructure to move the rubber based on that.
The guy was a genius. He figured it out so that you could, one puppeteer. You could sit back with a beer, smoking a cigarette, and the director would say action. You could just go, there's your librarian ghost.
There was going to be a second stage to the transformation that would push out her muzzle, and there was these sharp, like monstery teeth.
There's a lot of stills around of me sculpting the arms of this demon coming forward, and then Steve Johnson had sculpted the head for that based off of what we had done for the first part of the transformation.
And then Richard's like, no second puppet. No second puppet. Don't break the bank, Stevie boy. And I'm like, but it's almost done. It'll be so much better. He's like, it's 36 frames. Leave it. Just leave it.
It was the right decision because it's a great moment. It happens fast and it has the effect it needs.
We were working on this film for quite a long time, and someone said, well, there was a TV show called Ghostbusters, which I didn't know.
I'm Spencer.
Tracy.
The Taito was owned by a company called Filmation that mainly made cartoons. When we started shooting, Columbia didn't want to make a deal with them, so we thought it might be called Ghost Breakers.
Blasters?
Blasters. Ghost Blasters. Ghost Stoppers. We're ready to believe you.
Now we're good again. Keep your focus right on the lens.
We're dying.
For a while, we had all these stamps we were supposed to use for lab reports and stuff like that, and these different names.
Yeah.
We were doing one scene where we had to put a sign up that said Ghostbusters, then we had to put up a sign up that said Ghost Breakers. And that's when I phoned them and said, we can't do this. We'll never finish the movie. You got to clear that title. So they paid some money and cleared the title, but gave Filmation the rights to use the name Ghostbusters in a cartoon show.
Starts Monday at 3:30 only on Channel 11.
Hey, does this pole still work?
Firehouse. We knew we wanted a decommissioned firehouse.
The firehouse was found right on the edge of Soho in New York and the beginning of Tribeca. There's an intersection of Varick and Northmoor.
It turns out that's a style of firehouse. So the exterior of the firehouse is in New York, and people are very proud of it, and they drive by it all the time. But the interior is actually a very similar firehouse in downtown Los Angeles.
Built the exact same year as the New York firehouse, so it was an excellent match.
Ghostbusters logo, for instance, was easy.
Coming to save the world.
But I didn't create that, I just got it done. It was in Danny's script. For me, it was just getting it implemented, and it wasn't a matter of doing a major logo for a major film for their ad campaign. It was to do something they could put on their shirts and on the sign, on the side of the car. And we had a team of artists already working in the effects house. I went to the one I knew the best.
Brent Boats designed the logo.
And I said, give me versions of this logo. And we just handed them over to the art department.
We wrote this character of a neighbor to whoever the woman was in the building.
We did want John Candy in the movie. We loved John, and we'd all worked with him starting back at Second City.
In fact, I have storyboards that I did for John. The party sequence where the terror dog breaks through the wall, and I drew John Candy through the whole sequence.
He was a real favorite of mine and a good friend. And I remember calling Candy up and saying, okay, John, I got a great part. And I sent over sort of that first rough draft that we threw together so quickly. And he called back and he said, well, I'm thinking of doing him in a German accent, and he's got to have dogs. I said, dogs? What? Yeah, big German shepherds. I said, but John, he can't have German shepherds, can't have dogs at all, because part of the plot is, you know, there's these dogs on the roof, and people are going to get confused, and the story is complicated enough. And he just got adamant that he had to be a German person, and he had to have German shepherds.
But John wanted too much money. He kind of got agented right out of the movie.
And Rick Moranis, who was working with him on SCTV and who I knew because I'm Canadian and we all know each other, I called him up and I thought maybe he would be a very good version of what we were writing, which is a more uptight kind of nerdy kind of character. Rick Moranis read it in 24 hours and called me back and he said, I'm so happy. This is the greatest script I've ever read. I want to be in it.
Yeah, ghosts. They scare the pants off me. The polyester pants off me.
Rick was there and great and brilliant and really had a great take on that character, so he became Louis Tully. I'd say Sigourney was the biggest surprise in the movie for us and had the most profound impact on the finished product.
You know, we had been writing so quickly, there was no female part, really. We knew there was a woman in this building on Central Park that Bill Murray comes to check out because of, you know, stuff that was going on there. And we had the effects. We didn't really have any character. We had no real role for her.
We've been accused for years of not writing good female characters because comedy at the time was very much a boys' club.
We really met some wonderful actresses for this part.
Don't you remember me? I'm Peter Beck from Ghostbusters.
I am Zool. I am the gatekeeper. My psychiatrist thinks I'm losing my mind. My friends think I'm taking LSD, and I haven't even had the nerve to tell my parents yet.
Finally, Sigourney Weaver walks in, all 6'8" feet of her.
You know, I'm not sure how they thought of me because I really hadn't done, I'd done a lot of comedy in the theater, but not in movies. I then had to meet Ivan Reitman. I remember I went out to LA and I auditioned for him. He filmed it, which was the first time I'd ever been filmed in an audition.
She's talking about it, and she finally says, you know, I should get possessed in this movie. And I thought, oh my God, am I going to have another John Candy conversation?
I remember that I so wanted to get the job that I then became a dog toward the end of the scene. I was supposed to become the terror dog, and so I was jumping around and grabbing the cushions.
She's wearing kind of a short dress, and it's kind of sexy. And she's baying to the moon, and I was so knocked out. The woman who knocked off the alien was there baying at the moon in my office.
I think I frightened him. He said later he would never show the tape to anyone.
And I turned around. I remember calling up Dan and Harold and saying, you know, she was saying she should be possessed, and, you know, it sort of makes sense.
And I did really feel that I could do a good job as Dana, because I loved the script. I thought it was just such a love letter to our common condition and to New York.
Sigourney, she's this very beautiful, statuesque, very intelligent woman, but she really is also kind of a Margaret Dumont-like presence. She has the kind of regality that Margaret Dumont had with the Marx Brothers, and I thought, yeah, she could work. She's certainly an extraordinary actress, but beyond that, you know, she would have the strength and presence to just not get bullied over by the likes of Bill Murray.
So she took it, and it made us want to be better, just raised the whole level and made Bill want to be better. And he came up with the idea of, I'm going to prove myself to you. You know, the idea that she was way too good for him, which was so apparent in everything they did and said to each other.
I am madly in love with you.
Don't believe this. Will you please leave?
And the idea that he needed to prove himself was very important, because it gave us some rooting interest in his character actually winning her over.
No kiss.
I remember at the time I had a Brazilian nanny who was really cute, and she had a very whimsical way of putting herself together. And I said, I've got this funny audition, and I'd like you to dress me for it. So my Brazilian nanny dressed me for it, and I went in and got the role.
There's a scene where Egon's working under her desk. Maybe she has eyes for him a little bit. She's trying to be flirtatious.
I bet you like to read a lot, too. That may have been a bit of an addition, that we found that there was a little chemistry thing there. It was like, well, why not?
We actually explored that relationship in the original script.
I want you to take this.
What is it?
It's a souvenir from the World's Fair at Flushing Meadow in 1964.
And there's a little tiny bit of it in the movie, but I started to feel it was really wrong for Egon to suddenly become emotionally involved in any way in the movie. But Annie Potts was so lovely to work with and was so much in the spirit of it, just really got it. She's kind of a Southern girl, but she put on that kind of fake Bronx, Brooklyn thing for the character, and it worked so well.
A lot of casting people wouldn't see me. They go, oh no, to New York. And I was, I'm from the South. I put on that accent. I was actually acting.
She was really just a lovely part of the team, I thought.
We got one! That line probably be on my tombstone.
He had this song, and my manager took this over to Ivan Reitman. He said, do you want to do this movie? Here's this song. Do you think you can do it? I said, sure, sounds good. I said, let me see some of the stuff. He said, I have no time for that. He says, I need you to take a look at the lyrics, figure out some appropriate changes, and fax this over to me. He says, in about 30 minutes. And you know, you learn in this business, first answer is always yes. Then you hang up the phone and figure out how you're gonna do this. So I finished what I'm doing in 45 minutes or so and fax these changes over to Ivan. And Ivan goes, yeah, this works. I thought the way they used the song was brilliant. And, you know, the Busboys were all about, and still are, working class thought process. And the fact that they used us right at the point that they finally got some work, that was just like, yeah, I was a genius.
The Sedgwick Hotel was shot at the Biltmore Hotel in downtown Los Angeles.
I was actually put up for the man from the EPA, the part that William Atherton played. And then my agent rang one day and said, would you like a booby prize?
Across from the Biltmore Hotel in Los Angeles is just a park. But when you look out the doors there, you'll see a whole cityscape that was created. What we did is we took over part of the street and built some storefronts that we then saw through the doors.
It was a sequence that should have taken 2-3 days, but they were working on a deadline and had to get it in that amazingly long night. It was a very difficult camera move, and it required precise timing. Well, I was Mr. XRSC, London Academy of Music and Dramatic Art, prepared actor, knowing my lines backwards and forwards and timing it all out. But then they put me down with those guys.
Did you ever report it to anyone?
No, heavens, no.
No.
And I'm just sort of guesstimating when they're going to finish riffing, and we would continually be wrong. And finally, Ivan Reitman got very annoyed. In fact, he yelled at me. I can't remember now whether it was Dan or Bill who piped up and said, "Back off, Ivan. It's our fault. Don't go on his case." And I to this day, I think I was a surrogate for some frustration, because if I was Ivan Reitman, I wouldn't want to be yelling at my stars either.
I hope we could take care of this quietly tonight.
John DeVikis and I designed the movie in terms of just the props in the car. Of course, we had a fantastic professional crew of Hollywood props designers and costumers. But the basic ideas for the pack, the Ecto, that was DeVikis and myself. He is a college friend of mine, and he drew up all my concepts for me. So when we walked in, we had the Ecto, we had the packs, we had the wands, we had the technology of all those props, we had the jumpsuits, we had the whole look of the industrial cleaners.
In the script, these just shoot the beams. We're called neutrona wands because I had a pack, you had some sort of device that went down to your wrist, and these would come out. You would press a button and then you'd have 2 beams go up.
One of the lines is, okay, make them hard. So the physical prop had to be able to click, and then the thing had to have an erection.
The clear tube would pop out of the end, which seemed to, simulate some kind of techno erection.
And they are phallic.
Right, exactly.
So,
I mean, and it was not a film that, that was going to be a subtle aspect of it.
People always question the yellow hose that was connected came out of the proton pack and ran into a flanged valve on our thighs. And I don't know, for some reason they made the rubber tube yellow, which suggested that it was some kind of catheter. I don't know. But the proton packs, there were several versions. Whenever we were going to do a physical stunt, there was actually a rubber model of the proton packs. You could fall on it and not hurt yourself, but nothing on it worked. And then there was the full version, which had all the batteries in it and powered up the whole pack, and that probably weighed over 25 pounds. That got Murray complaining a lot. Bill he's cranky, and he just would complain all the time about lugging those things around. So whenever possible, they would, as soon as we were done with the heavy ones, they'd switch them out. And they put a nice deep hum into the soundtrack as the proton pack kind of fires up.
Shouldn't sound like a light switch. It had to sound like it was expensive and heavy duty, and when it made it sound, something was going to happen. The idea that, okay, they turn this on and it actually takes time to charge up. Like, the energy that they have isn't available instantly.
It's a really nice setup of that the equipment has some danger, some occupational hazard associated with it. Then, of course, when we open up on the poor maid.
I was on the set at that time. We had loaded the cart fairly heavily, and we said we had to go tell the lady what was going to go happening. And the director said, no, let's just do it.
First test of that, she walks out with her cart, and then when the guys shoot, there's such a huge sort of pyro explosion. Scared the hell out of her.
She ducked and covered, which is fairly prudent, and then she looked up and said,
"What the hell are you doing?"
What the hell are you guys doing? Just in the film.
That was a natural reaction.
The biggest problem with the proton packs was, it was with the wands as well, was trying to figure out how the beams would work. They had to be animated, we knew that, and there weren't a lot of animated effects around other than a ray gun.
This is all film-based as opposed to digitally-based special effects.
Today it'd be easy digitally, but it wasn't. It was all hand animation then.
In order to make the shot work, you have to figure out how to distract the eye in an artful way.
And we did all these boards and everything. And when Dan came in, though, and it was like, we started talking about the neutron wands, it was like talking to a child. And he started talking about it, and he said, it's not a laser. He goes, imagine like an 8-year-old kid grabs a fire hose and turns it on and just starts whipping them around the room.
When you'd pull the trigger for the first time, the photo flashbulb at the end of the wand would go off, which the special effects guys used as a reference for when the beam came on.
I wanted strobe lights and interactive lighting to tie things into a physical set.
So everybody had these dramatic shadows and the place was blown out.
Because you don't want to have to animate, kind of flare. You can do that, but it's not as successful as shooting the real thing.
It's a bonding agent.
So that's a part of understanding filmmaking tricks and cheats.
The scene would be storyboarded. There would be 5 beam shots. Ivan would cut together this footage, and it was funnier and better, and suddenly there were 11. We said, well, we don't have time, we don't have the money, do it. And John Bruno was smart enough, realizing the deadline ahead of us, to come up with a concept that he knew those people could deliver. And if there was one thing we kept adding to the movie, it was beam shots.
To come up with a look that was like rubberized light. It was the signature look to Ghostbusters.
How are we going to get 4 guys to point these things in the right direction?
And it happens very quickly. It's hard to see, but if you look at this stuff slowly, you actually realize often that there's a blast at the target and it shoots actually into the gun. So there's energies going out and coming back in at the same time.
When they decided to actually see the ghost, that it would be difficult to shoot in the corridors of the hotel because it would be hard to get as much light in there as they would need for some of the special effects. So subsequently they built those corridors at Warner Brothers.
Well, Slimer, started off as drawings. And then Steve Johnson sculpted it.
The thing that was amazing about getting the opportunity to work at Boss Film was that for the first time, there was a whole other tool chest. Optical effects. You could do so many things that were never, ever possible on some of the films I'd worked with people like Rick Baker and Rob Bottin on.
The visual effects work was done in 65 millimeter, where Laszlo was using a 35 millimeter camera. And then that image would be composited and then reduced down to 35 in an optical printer. Each time you go a generation, the quality drops. And so when you do make these dupes and copies, the quality comes out to be about as though it was an original photography.
John Bruno was a really good friend of mine. And John always wanted to push for more and more and more and more and more. It drove me nuts. It drove me out of my mind. I'm like, are you really 7 sculptures, 7 full scale before you're going to say this is enough?
Number 7.
Don't we have to actually make the creature? At some point, we've got to actually make it.
Well, he looked like a potato.
He's an ugly little spud, isn't he?
I think he can hear you, Ray.
But what John was pushing for on the Slimer character, because he knew it was going to be double exposed, a lot of the detail is going to go away because it's a ghost image in the film, and he was going to art direct that, and he was going to control that. So the first few sculptures of Slimer were subtle. They were much more realistic. And John he would come over and say, how can you make it more insane? How can you make people look at this and have their eyeballs pop out of their head? And I loved working with John, but he was a tough taskmaster.
This sort of lime fluorescent green. But it was kind of a color we came up with that we could see in this art-directed room.
I, to this day, credit Richard Edlund with coming up with the technique to actually pull that off, to get an amorphous blob that's incredibly cartoony and animated to fly around and do all of these things. I, being this crazy artiste, wanted to do it an almost impossible way. I originally wanted to do it with these really long, skinny arms that were mechanical and not have any performer inside it, so that it would not at all look like a human. Richard just looked at me one day. He goes, "You're out of your mind. Stick a guy in a suit, let his legs come out, and we'll film him and use his real arms." Now, the thing that was really interesting about that is I thought, okay, if Richard said that we can remove his legs optically, that means I can make other things black and stick them all around the character, and he'll just have to remove them too. But I sat there and I thought to myself, I knew what the movie was about. mean, it's about insanity. It's about cartoon characters. It's about Tex Avery. And so I thought, well, you tie a string to a piece of rubber and you pull it with a cable, it's 12 feet long, you're just going to get that. And I thought to myself, a cartoon character, when they smile, no. Their faces actually deform and inflate and their heads flatten and all of these insane things happen. So I thought, we're going to put him in front of a black stage. If we can remove his legs, we can remove as many puppeteers as we can get around him. The way Slimer worked is there is a performer, a guy named Mark Wilson, who was actually in charge of doing the mechanical aspects of pulling it all together.
Do that flying stuff, Mark. No. Never mind.
They did a life cast on me to sculpt the arms over and to position and figure out the proportions of the head and where my head would fit inside the costume.
He looks through the mouth. There's mechanical eyes up here. His arms come through the stomach of the thing wearing rubber gloves, and then his legs just stuck out of the butt.
It was almost like a Japanese Go theater where everyone's in black, and this is shot against a black background, so you could only then see the green Slimer rubber.
And I wore a black duvetine skirt for about a month, which I've grown beyond.
So what we ended up doing is I designed all of these wrinkles that are concentric and going back, in his huge smile. And then a performer in a black suit could go behind the character while we're filming him, reach his arms into handles on his cheeks and go, and you just get all this free muscle.
Okay, Mark. Just more cartoon animated, kind of quick, jerky. It looked really good like that one.
I put a strap under my chin, which went into a fiberglass helmet. So by moving my head, then I could make Slimer's head change direction.
In order to keep it from just drooping on the performer's body, we put a series of concentric spring steel bands. What that also did was an amazing bonus that we didn't necessarily expect on. It would make his body just jiggle around like a fat cartoon character might do. And it also didn't kill Mark, so that was good.
So when you do grab, just bring your hands forward. Don't flail them.
All of Slimer was shot at the Boss Films shooting stage, which was, I think, just one door over from where we were building the costumes.
This was pre-radio controlled servo motors. These were all cable controlled.
There will be cables coming up under the costume, and those cables go to about a half a dozen puppeteers who have levers that connect to the cables, and they're pulling on those levers to make the various things work. Well, these people have to work in unison. It's almost like a band.
It wasn't until we actually got on the stage and started shooting him that we realized how funny it was.
Shake your butt. Turn around and shake your butt. Turn all the way around, like you're digging in the room service card.
Slimer was intended to be the spirit of John Belushi, kind of to complete the team. John Belushi had died by that time.
Definitely, it's John. No doubt.
Because I asked him, do you want him to look like John Belushi?
I was writing a scene up in the hotel scene, what became the hotel scene. Originally was a guest house in Greenville, New York, like a bed and breakfast with this couple that was terrorized, and we had to go up there, upstate, And I was writing John's line when I heard he died.
We watched John Belushi movies, and we watched Animal House on video in particular, and watched all of his facial expressions. And they're actually in the performance. And there are things, that Belushi would do with his eyebrows, and you've probably seen things like that. And I love that. So I managed to get the eyebrow expressions as the puppeteer.
Some tricks on Slimer is he rarely moved.
He is on a big cart, and along with him on the cart are the various other puppeteers.
Even though I might be moving and gyrating, the option was either to move all the puppeteers and the puppet, or to move the camera. It was obvious that moving a camera on a dolly track became much simpler.
Because Richard basically pioneered the motion control thing. The way you get a spaceship to move. You don't move the spaceship, you move the camera.
Hands out more, Mark. Warm light. Good on mouth. Great mouth. Whoa!
I do remember that on the stage, Ivan actually voiced that creature.
That's doing some neat stuff.
I was shoved in right behind the puppet with my arm through the back of his head into the tongue. Mark, totally blind because he's hidden inside the suit. He had to pick up this plate, dump it into the creature's mouth over the tongue while I do these tongue things. And all of this food is going down and dropping onto the back of Mark's neck. All this slimy, chili, jelly food. And we get the shot. We're all cracking up, and we hear from inside the puppet, "Get me out of here."
Since it was such a frantic project, we were cutting corners and doing things as fast as we possibly could. And one of the shots that we needed was for the ghost to fly around the chandelier.
I did sculpt a miniature Slimer, like this big.
And so instead of using the big one, Gary shot a couple scenes with it. They cut the film together, and they wanted another shot. And all of a sudden, we couldn't find the little guy.
We were all sitting in a room talking, and what can we do? What can we do?
We're sitting there looking, and there's a bag of peanuts, and we're sitting there munching on one. And Gary picks up a peanut and looks at it, and the next thing I know, we're spray painting it green. And he's shooting a peanut going around, and I'm like, this is this is either gonna work or we're gonna lose our jobs. And we try to pass this off. And we shot it. We didn't say anything. We went in the dailies and cut it in the movie. I even looked at it, and it was great.
I went through the garbage when they were throwing stuff out, and I have that peanut, that green peanut.
Slimer, by the way, got the name Slimer. When he says, "It slimed me," that kind of stuck. It was the Onion Head until that moment.
The original script, it was a much bigger role. The character came at the very beginning of the movie. He was really a part of the team. He had just gotten out of the Air Force. He was a demolitions expert, major in the Air Force. So he had all this background history, which was really kind of cool, and I was really looking forward to playing that.
Well, what happened was we wanted to bring in a new Ghostbuster midway through the film.
We wanted a character that was not experienced, who was naturally going to come into the story a little later and would function for the audience to answer the questions of what was going on in New York.
To revive the audience's incredulity, someone who represented the audience, who couldn't believe all this was going on. And we wanted him to be actually more physical, more competent than we were, like in a military way. So we created a character who had all kinds of military training. And then we thought, let's make him African-American. It just seemed like, it just, I don't know why. Our social conscience, in a way, it just seemed right. If the movie was going to be widely seen, we thought, this represents, a kind of inclusiveness that we wanted to express. When you can make statements, why not?
I first heard about Ghostbusters on an elevator at Cedars-Sinai Hospital in Los Angeles, and I went to visit a friend, and I got on the elevator, and Ivan Reitman was on the elevator, and we had like 12 floors to sort of travel together, and that silence, after hello, and so he says, "I'm doing this this movie Ghostbusters." I said, "Oh, great," and he said, "But there's nothing in it for you." And then later on, I found out there was a part that they were casting a black actor in, but I think he thought I was all wrong for the part because I'd done a movie the year before called Space Hunter, but that character was sort of bigger than life. My head was shaved, the voice was kind of very demanding and commanding, and it was a very different character, and I think he sort of saw me that way.
He had come in earlier and had just auditioned, and there was this sweetness to him that I just loved, and I just cast him.
Seemed like the perfect guy, and physical and fit, which none of us really were supposed to be.
And it wasn't until we got ready to shoot the movie that the part had been rewritten, and it totally changed.
We wrote like the best lines for him. Turned out he was like the best written part in the movie. He had so many funny things to say. And when we turned in the draft to Ivan Reitman, he said, "You can't give all these lines to the fourth guy. You got to give these to Murray. Distribute these lines among yourselves. And a lot of it went to Bill's character, I have to say."
And somebody dropped the script off at the room that I was staying in at the Mayflower Hotel in New York. And it was actually the night before we started shooting. The character originally comes in page 6, and now he's on page 68, which is really hard for me to sort of come to grips with. I mean, I wrestled with that a lot. And I was shocked because we had rehearsed for about 3 weeks. And the next morning I went to the set and talked to Ivan about it. The PAs on the set didn't recognize me, so they didn't know that I was on the movie. And I was sort of in a hurry to get to talk to Ivan. And so, but they wouldn't let me on the set because they had no idea that I was working on the movie. So it started off being a little frustrating. and but it all worked out. The first week was difficult.
You know, there was a lot of sort of kind of silly, cynical talk about why he was in the movie, but he was in the movie because he was really good and he functioned perfectly for the story needs.
Harold Ramis was my sort of saving grace. Harold, throughout the filming of Ghostbusters, whenever there was things that I had difficulty understanding, and there were times, Harold, you know, was always the guy I'd sort of go to and go, man, what is, and he'd go, Ernie, you know, it's okay. And I think I learned a lot from Harold. You know, the many years since, I learned how to just sort of go with the flow, and things may not turn out the way you think they will, but sometimes you just have to ride it out because things will be fine.
Welcome aboard.
We didn't have a music supervisor in those days. Gary Lamel, who was head of music at Columbia at that point, did a lot of this with us. So we needed a theme song, and we tried a couple that didn't quite work. There was one we even had in a teaser trailer that came out around Christmas.
Ghostbusters, coming to save the world this summer.
We're ready to believe you.
And Gary Lamel said, I'm going to bring in this guy, Ray Parker, and show him the movie.
Part of it came about because I was dating this girl that worked for Gary Lamel. And I knew Gary Lamel from the Barry White days because I did all the Barry White records. I played guitar on them. And I got a call from Gary because there was just going to be one segment in the film at the library scene that I think was like 20 seconds long. And they just needed like a theme song or opening number with the words Ghostbusters in it. Now, it's unfair now because you've heard the song. But if you can imagine writing a song, Ghostbusters, we want to go, it just really doesn't sing well. It's a horrible, horrible word to sing to. I think I recorded maybe a minute and 15 or 20 seconds of it. And it took me 2.5, 3 days, which is all I had. And it was one of those things where you get your money if we get some music in 2 or 3 days. Otherwise, deal's off. And so I was completely worn out, tired, and I turned it in.
And I remember we were adding the music at the time. We put this song on and we went nuts. We said, that's it, this is perfect.
I remember the hardest part for me was putting the words in the song. And I remember the part of the Ghostbusters movie where they had a solicitation with a phone number in it. And the night before I turned into the song, I was half asleep, and on the TV comes this insect commercial, like these exterminator guys. We're going to get rid of the insects for you. And if you just close your eyes like this and you're real sleepy, the insect guys look to me like the Ghostbusters guys. And they had the phone number under the bottom. I was like, whoa, that's it. It's a commercial. You just go, who you going to call? And the people scream Ghostbusters. Ghostbusters!
Dan drove the Ectomobile. We followed him like a follow truck. We didn't have any permits. We put the guys in, and we just said, we're going all over the city and doing shtick.
We had all of this material that was shot in New York City and around, and we had to figure a way of making it a montage.
They just jump out of the car and they go like to Rockefeller Center.
I came up with this idea of using these newspapers and magazines as ways of transitioning from one live action shot to the next live action. It's a part of the creative process of putting together a montage, and you try to make it as different as possible.
The guy walks by and stares at him, and that's me.
Driving around that city in those ridiculous outfits with the logos everywhere and in that ambulance.
We only had one Ectomobile. And just having one of them, and it was an old car, was insane.
Ours was not the best running car.
It didn't even dawn on me that, you got to have two of everything, And we left our AD, Peter Giuliano, and he did the helicopter shot of the Ectomobile. Car conked out going across the bridge.
So we're pushing it, we're pushing this thing down 7th Avenue, and so you're running around, getting everything set up, calling background action, helping everybody push the Ectomobile, and then running back to Ivan's side as it's just sort of coasting. It's supposed to be driving this coasting down the street.
I think you just fix the car enough to just do this. We need to get this shot, get it running for this.
When you make a shot in a car, you only have a certain amount of street that you can control. But once you've done the shot, then you have to drive all the way around to come back to where you started. And in the city of New York, that's one-way streets everywhere.
And Ivan tells you, get in and drive the Cadillac out of the firehouse, come around the corner and give me 2 passes. I mean, you know.
So we did a lot of driving around in that ambulance as the Ghostbusters with Danny driving with no cameras around anywhere. So it was just, no one was even aware a movie was being made, but they'd see that ambulance and what the hell is that?
The Ectomobile, I came up with that fairly early on. That was on the little preview reel I made up for Ivan in the early part of the picture. The thing, whoa, whoa. Yeah, it has a vaguely European sound to it. I made that from a leopard howl that was edited and then reversed and played backwards, and the speed was changed. I mean, keeping in mind that there was no digital manipulation in those days. It was all razor blades and splicing tape sort of thing.
Our philosophy, sort of, on the movie was to combine the physical effects with the optical effects.
Dan Aykroyd's asleep, and suddenly his belt buckle's being undone, and his pants are unzipped.
That was a Stuart Ziff job, wasn't it?
Yeah. So how do you say that?
No, but I mean,
we don't want to call that the Stuart Ziff job.
the Stuart Ziff was the rabbi of the group.
Yeah, he was.
We worked very hard on that. That was added on. I had to hire someone, Al Coulter, to make that whole mechanism.
Little bits of wire and some strap springs that curl up and pull apart, bend it and tweak it and yank on it kind of stuff. And then, of course, condoms, air inflation device. And that's, I guess, important to the gag.
That was a long sequence. That was not meant to be a dream sequence. We built that set and worked out a whole scene where the boys come.
Dan Aykroyd and Ernie Hudson drive out to Fort Demering, and they're trying to find the Fort Demering ghost.
And there's a Revolutionary War ghost, and Danny gets the blowjob and the whole thing.
As they're looking around, it's late at night, and Dan Aykroyd falls asleep, and then this ghost appears, bathing him in magenta pink light. Wakes him up and unzips his pants and makes him cross his eyes.
I'm not sure what was going on. I mean, he was having a wonderful time with the ghost. If you're going to be haunted, that's the kind of ghost you want to be haunted by. And of course, my insecurity is, well, how come he gets to be to hang out with the ghosts and get? But I mean, what about me? I mean, but I got over it. I'm okay.
Once the film started on that ascent up, if they gave that the amount of time they originally thought, it would have broken that pace. It would have broken that ascent. So consequently, it just got edited down.
And once we were cutting it and knew it was going to be a montage, it was like I had to run back to the effects house and go, you can cut 4 scenes. You can cut 4 scenes.
I don't know where they get these guest conductors. I always felt like each partner I had in the scene was so brilliant at what they did.
I don't think that my character is good with competition, at least the way I played him. He's pretty in touch with his inner child.
It was one of the first scenes I shot. I think it might have been the first scene. Having it sort of start at Lincoln Center was a wonderful place to begin. We had a good time, and I thought Timothy Carhart did a great job, snuffling and
I didn't know how cool the movie was going to be because, they don't say, Tim, come to the set, a month before your turn and we'll show you everything. They don't do that. You just show up when your job is.
It was a fun place to do a scene, and it was the beginning of what I feel is one of the great things about Ghostbusters, which is it's such a love letter to New York.
Sigourney's a real straight shooter, and of course Bill is so not. I shot a couple of days before I did my first scene with Bill. It was like, well, isn't Bill supposed to be here? I mean, what time was Bill's call? Anyway, Bill missed his call by some hours. So much so that we had to start shooting that scene with the stand-in. And then he came in and he clearly didn't know what the scene was, hadn't looked at it. Bill was very willing to just improvise that scene. But you can't now improvise the scene because we've already shot half of it, so you kind of have to do the lines. He was a little embarrassed about having been that late. So he was amusing everybody, but not me so much. He was like, "What's wrong? What's wrong, Annie? Come on."
Ghostbusters, what do you want?
I said, "Nothing's wrong. I would just like you to stand on your fucking mark and say your fucking line, and then I'll be fine." And as I recall, the crew applauded.
It's a good job, isn't it? I'm Walter Peck. I didn't do any deep background work on the juvenile life of Walter Peck. I felt I had my own juvenile life that was perfectly fine to draw from. I didn't need anybody else's. I lived in New York, and I went and I met them. I kind of known them peripherally because I worked with Gilda Radner in New York. So I had met all of them then, and it was they were iconic comics. When I talked to Harold about it, and I talked to Ivan about it, I knew that I can't compete in being funny. I have to play this like Antigone. You know, I have to be a male Margaret Dumont. That's how I thought of it. Certainly wasn't a comedian, and I wasn't going to be able to compete with them on that stage, which would have been stupid. And so they taught me the character, essentially. The character is part of the architecture of the story. They need a foil, a bad guy or some kind of antagonist. Theone Aldrich, who was a great costume designer, I'd known her from the Public Theater. And so we sat down and she said, "Well, what do you want to do? What do you want to look like?" And I said, "Well, I wanted to make it visually significant. I wanted a dark blue kind of suit. I had a little Phi Beta Kappa pin that's very hard to see, but it kind of anchors you." And Theone helped me a great deal with that, just kind of putting the right kind of pinstripe, the right kind of tie. And I grew a beard for it. And I took a deep breath and I hoped that it would kind of work out, and it seems to. You can have it your way, Mr. Venkman.
Sigourney Weaver. She's in her apartment. Various things happen. She sits in a chair. This hand breaks through and grabs her leg. And another hand breaks through and grabs her over here. Well, the shooting of that, puppeteers underneath with these claws would reach up.
There were 3 puppeteers, very techie guys. I had to really kind of encourage them to not be afraid of hurting me, or God knows they would not offend me if they grabbed me here. They have these big rubber puppet hands anyway.
Of course, this is Sigourney Weaver, and they just wouldn't do it with the right amount of force.
What happened in the first couple of takes was, try to find where they could grab her without being, rude.
And she looks down at the puppeteer working the middle thing and she goes, "Go ahead, make my day."
And in the next take, one arm grabs her leg, the other arm grabs her breast. It was a take, they went on to the next shot.
They were all so sweet and so like,
But there was something very powerful, particularly for the actors, because they really did experience what finally the audience was going to see to a great extent.
Terror dogs were a problem. We're called terror dogs almost arbitrarily because they could have been lizard creatures or gobbledygooks. I mean, they had things they had to do, like run around and be terrible. So it had restraints. It had to exist on the ground. It wasn't a floating ecto whatever. So they had to be scary. They couldn't be silly like the Onion Head, because the laughs of the scenes were not based on it being silly.
I think the biggest thing was, are these damn things going to work, was the big question with regards to the terror dogs.
So we kind of took the terror dog term literally. So I took it to some artists and said, interpret it as a mad dog. And then we kept on moving through that, and it just morphed into something that's a cross between a lizardy creature, but acts sort of like a dog.
By the time I got to Ghostbusters, a lot of the concept drawings had been done already, and I think everybody was pretty much snowblind with all these really good but totally diverse interpretations by Bernie Wrightson and by Tom Enriquez and by a few other people. It was like going through the Louvre. They finally settled on one, designed by Tom Enriquez, which looked like, a bit like the Forbidden Planet id monster, but with 4 legs and horns. As a concept, very good. Then they made a maquette of that, which Michael Gross presented me as something that was animatable, and I didn't think it was. It was very cartoonish. I mean, it was totally legitimate interpretation of that initial concept sketch of Tom's, I was asked, what my design would be. And so I sculpted my interpretation of it, which is more anatomically valid. A few notes were given, and I made some changes insofar as the anatomy was concerned. Not much. Richard wanted him to be more muscular, more weightliftery. I think the original maquette was a little better, but because I think I made him too, like so many Americans, he got too big. Got too fat. He's a little chubby. But that's okay, because it's a comedy. So it's part Tom, part me, part, Harryhausen.
I definitely asked to be shown. Of course, my first conversation with Ivan about the Terror Dogs was that I could just put on a suit and be a terror dog. He thought that was about the silliest idea in the world, But I was from the theater, so I can be a terror dog.
The terror dogs were made in many scales. Whenever the terror dog would run, that was a stop motion puppet. And the original one was sculpted by Randy Cook, and ultimately he did the stop motion animation.
But I, oversaw the sculpture of not only the small one, which I sculpted myself, but the big one, which Mike Hosh led off on, that he and Linda Frobos were working on at night. And I remember the last 2 or 3 nights before it had to be molded, everybody weighed in. Steve Johnson and Linda Frobos and Mark Wilson and myself, maybe Billy Bryan, I don't remember. A lot of people started, doing the final detail on the face. And the way we made that work was Polaroid camera, little model, stop motion model, big model. And I just kept taking Polaroids, matching Polaroids of the two until I couldn't tell the difference. And then we were done.
And they had to somehow look like something that could be in a statue.
It's supposed to be that the stone statue came to life, but the only way we could do it in a hurry was just in there and it claws its way out.
And this is actually what you see underneath. And the eye, if you notice, there are wires here. This was the actual prop. And there was also a little push rod operated by air. And it would push through this little hole, and that's what broke away the plaster.
Sometimes the simple stuff works even more effectively than the more elaborate things that we're used to seeing right now.
And because that was Randy's gig, I just really wanted to go see if he was going to fuck up or not.
The terror dogs in the temple were one of the first things that we had to shoot, long before the mechanics could be done for the inside of them. So I suggested to production that we build dummy dogs, basically no substructure at all. Dogs, we call them. These puppets had no eye movement, they had no mouth movement, they had nothing.
And then an electric carving knife, like you'd carve a turkey, carved out the inside.
So that a puppeteer could get inside each from below. I reasoned that we could get our wide shots with them, and then they could go in later when the proper puppets were made and do inserts.
But there were these big masses of rubber as they were kind of forklifted onto the location.
The puppeteers had to get inside these things and find out if they could breathe and if they would get poisoned by the residual urethane aroma, bouquet we call it.
There was a male and female, or a large horn, I guess, and a little horn.
We had 2 puppets with interchangeable horns that were otherwise virtually identical.
So he asked me, he said, you're a girl, you're a female puppeteer, and I know this is going to be a little bit weird, but do you think if I put a female puppeteer in the temple dog that Sigourney turns into, that it will be more feminine? Well, just so you know, the answer is yes.
They had little TV sets so they could see what they were doing. Little tiny, itsy TV sets. The finest Radio Shack could provide.
When you climbed into it, you were strapped into it like a race car harness.
You could actually lean into them and pilot them, turn the heads and have them lean.
It took a lot of upper body strength.
The floor of the actual set was built 4 feet off the ground. So if the director said, hey, I want the terror dog over there, the grips would cut a hole in the floor and the puppeteer would come from the bottom and we'd put the sitting terror dog on it, and also cables went under the floor to all the people with levers to operate the cables, to make the cheeks move or whatever, the eyebrows move.
The first time we reveal it, He opens a door and he throws the jacket and lands on this thing. Well, I'm the guy that was throwing the jacket, and I kept missing. Ivan was there, and he was getting really mad. I don't know. I did it a lot. I mean, to the point where, okay, if you can't make it, somebody else is going to do it. And anyway, the last shot I got, I think I did it like 15 times. I kept missing. It seemed easy.
Because we had him really shaking it off. And he said, no. We wanted, Randy would say, no, I want it more of a head, like that kind of a thing.
The movements were very minimal, which was sort of echoed in the animation as well.
Stop motion animation is, you got to be nuts to do this.
Then it was on to the animation stage. Doug Beswick made the armature based upon the creature which had already been built. It's always better to build it, build the armature first and the creature afterwards, but our drawings were quite accurate because we used to do elevation drawings, right, top and side and front.
Reach over and pet him on top of the head.
Gunnar Ferdinandson did the mold, which was a work of art. He was the preeminent mold maker of, in every shop in the business. I'd grown up making my own mold. I'd made my own molds, and boy, those were sloppy stuff. But he and Richard Ruiz, did it right. I remember the Central Park thing because I wasn't there to oversee it. No measurements were taken of the thing.
This was one of those cases where we had to just shoot something that wasn't there and make that work.
And that was a nightmare because it took a long time to figure it out because we had no dimensions. It wasn't match moved. It was we had to make up a match move. Complicated thing.
You only had one crack at it because it took him at least a day to shoot it, and it took him a couple of days to set it up.
We had no time left. Didn't know how it was going to turn out. We get back the next day for dailies. The whole set has been struck. The Terror Dog's there. The blue screen against which he was shot has gone off to Metro for 2010. No retakes, and the film wasn't to come back for another couple of hours, so I was nervous. As it worked out, it was okay. I would have done it over for the simple reason that the blur of the camera canceled out the blur of the puppet. So it's got that flaw to it, but what are you going to do?
There was never a situation where we said, we can't deliver that, we have to cut it.
I think we only had 140 shots. It was the original number. And then when we had about 3 or 4 weeks left, Ivan decided to add 100 shots.
The time constraints, the changing of the schedule.
We had people working 7 days a week. I remember they rented some condominiums across the street from Boss Films so people could see their families occasionally.
It's great when you work on the weekend because you get paid overtime, but if people work too many weekends, they get completely burned out, and then the quality of work goes down, mistakes are made.
When Ivan came over to add these shots, I met him I'm in the parking lot with a samurai suit.
That's
And I said, Ivan, we need to do the samurai cut. We can't possibly do 50, 100 more shots. You have to be reasonable here. I mean, the guys are bleeding already. And then we went over by $700,000. Then they started griping about that, even though they had added all these shots in the last minute. And I mean, there were blood in the shoes in the optical department.
We actually shook everybody up in the business, and they cut 6 months off your post-production schedule. Says, well, if they could do it, anybody can do it.
Considering what they could do then and what they could do now, with the limited resources that they had back then, it was beautifully pulled off.
What I loved was that Dana, is a sort of normal person and then becomes Zool. It was the kind of thing I'd done in theater, sort of transforming completely within, 10 seconds. But in movies, you're not usually encouraged to do that. I had a brilliant makeup artist, and we worked for a long time to get my hair like that, and lots of kind of phosphorescent makeup. He did just a great job. And finally, I did look like I had stuck my finger in a socket and then turned it to someone else. Between the wind and the light and the makeup and everything, my beautiful dress that Theone Aldrich had made for me, this sort of orangey, flamey dress, I felt quite possessed, and it was a lovely feeling. And then every now and then, Ivan would say, just, do a little bit less, If you give the editor stuff like that, grotesque stuff like what you're doing, he's going to want to put it in the movie.
When we shot it, that first day, it was shot in City Hall. And it was either the mayor's office or an alternate office. I remember Mayor Koch came in to visit for a moment. He was then the mayor of New York.
Every once in a while, Bill would get in a role and that unity that they have, and you really can feel outside of it. And so trying to jump in the middle of all that, the improv, and they'd work together in that sort of medium. I came from strictly acting. I mean, I came from theater, but they were, just let it roll and see what happens.
Bill Murray said, they should know each other. And they should be on a first-name basis, the Cardinal. And he said, and your name is Lenny. So that was improvised. That was not in the script. And the Cardinal and me being pals, which was such a New York thing, that was Bill Murray's inspired notion.
But they gave me the line about, I've seen shit that'll turn you white. I think they were doing me a favor. I'm not sure. I get that a lot. Hey, Ernie Hudson, say that line, in the mayor's office, And then they won't say the bad word because they want me to say the bad word.
I have seen shit that'll turn you white.
I love the run that Bill Murray has where he refers to Bill Atherton as Dickless, which Bill, I'm sure, has really learned to appreciate over the years.
Years later, I see William Atherton. I say, God, Ghostbusters is amazing, right? I mean, I said, I walk down the street and people yell, yo, Egon, yeah, hey, Brainiac. Really had a big effect on all our careers, right? And he says, yeah.
I'm walking down 46th Street and the Criterion Theater is there and and Ghostbusters is playing. And all these buses are out in front and all the kids are coming in from camp. So I'm walking by the buses and there are about 800 million kids leaning out the window going, hey, Dickless!
Not so good for Bill.
Then I started to laugh because it wasn't true.
Well, you can believe Mr. Pecker.
It was kind of like Barnum and Bailey. We were all crammed into the room. There were a lot of us. We were all yelling. And I remember Bill just kind of riffing and us playing off of him. It was kind of like, well, you're on the Titanic and all of a sudden Abbott and Costello were there, and what are our last minutes on Earth going to be like?
I was just going with the text. The text always begins everything. And there was something so New York about it. And I remember Ivan Reitman, the director, suggesting that I do certain very broad things, and I said, no. I said, they're the comedians. I should be as realistic as possible. Because I'm the base, I'm the reality base. I am the skeptical one. I am the New Yorker. Who are these Ghostbusters? I mean, come on.
It was a lot of fun, but it was like throwing it all up in the air and just kind of going with it. So it was terrifying and wonderful at the same time.
We had this massive location on Central Park West between, I think it was 66th and 67th Street. So it's also where the traffic not only goes north and south in the city, but east and west. The city, when they finally realized what we wanted to do, panicked and revoked the permit. When they did it, it was the day we were shooting at City Hall. And all of a sudden, we couldn't find Bill or Danny. And for an hour, we couldn't find them. And then they reappeared. And they said, we just talked with Mayor Koch because we're at City Hall. So they went to see the real mayor. And he's going to fix it, and we're going to be able to shoot. It was fantastic.
The location was 55 Central Park West, which is just up the street from the Mayflower Hotel where I was staying. So, I could just roll out of bed and walk up to the set. I think in the movie we claim it's 550, which doesn't exist.
And that building had graduated colors. If you look at it from out in the park, it starts darker and gets lighter as it goes up. It's really a beautiful Art Deco building.
We realized that every time we were in front of the real building in New York, looking up, we're gonna have to put a top on it. And then if you were looking down on it, it would have to be a matte painting. So there were all these ways we had to deal with the top of the building.
Then we had this big crowd scene, and were all the extras in New York. They're very professional people. There's all this theater people.
All the different kinds of New Yorkers selling T-shirts and all that. It was a very meaningful scene. I grew up in New York, and I was born here, and I have to say that I can't watch that scene without crying. Just to see all the different New Yorkers there.
It may have been the first movie that I did extra work on, and it was 4 days. I think there were 2 night shoots and 2 day shoots. Bill Murray was a clown. He came and talked to us between takes. I was very much into the new romantic kind of movement. And my roommate and myself sort of fancied that I looked a little bit like Tom Bailey from the Thompson Twins. But I literally looked like I had put a bowl on my head and cut it around there. And my roommate at the time would color it for me, this bright, crazy red color. The name of the color was Red Penny. It was the 80s.
What was interesting about the movie is we kind of had to do the ending first.
John DeCure designed this set piece, this sort of post-wreckage.
We never broke ground in Manhattan. In other words, we had a street, we couldn't dig a hole. So when you see the scenes where there's a half a cop car in a hole and a bunch of cement coming up, whatever, that's all built above ground. And it worked perfectly. And amazingly, there's New Yorkers who were going by thought it was real.
And the person who was meeting me for brunch came in and said, "Are you guys shooting today? You're going to have a real problem. There's been some sort of cave-in on the street. The police are here. I don't know how you're going to be able to shoot." So I figured, well, that looks realistic.
We discovered how you could paralyze New York by chopping 2 trees down in the right place.
We'd have to stop the traffic, move the set dressing out, shoot 2 takes, clear the set dressing off, open up the traffic.
Closed New York down, that whole section. It was a nightmare.
The horns were honking back to infinity. I mean,
Thinking, my God, they really were able to do this. Who's the location manager for this? Who has he bribed? This is New York. Who's just gotten a lot of money? You know, somebody's done very well for this.
At one point, we shut down traffic in 3/4 of Manhattan. The traffic would back up all the way across Central Park to the east side and all the way down to Columbus Circle, which would then create a traffic jam on 8th Avenue, Broadway, and 7th Avenue and 59th Street, which are major traffic arteries. So people down past 35th Street in Manhattan would be stopped for no reason they could figure out. The word would spread out, Ghostbusters.
So what John DeCure did quite brilliantly is back in LA, reproduced the front of the building.
The front of Sigourney's building on street level was just incredible because it was made to vibrate and shake as if it's in an earthquake.
And then we had a big pit with hydraulic lifts.
So the whole sections of pavement would, tilt up.
And then we just had to match it.
The idea of a rooftop temple came to us. We didn't really know where the final confrontation was going to take place. And I remembered a book called Rooftops of New York. And New York has the most extraordinary rooftops. There's temples and there's chateaus, Architects, it was a little conceit, I guess, during the great era of a skyscraper building, was to put something kind of interesting on top. And I remembered a skyscraper in St. Louis where I went to college that had a replica of the Temple of Halicarnassus, one of the wonders of the ancient world. So I thought, well, why can't we have this incredible rooftop, that as a setting? And it looks like a mock temple, but turns out to be a real temple.
John DeCure liked to build. John DeCure really liked to build. John DeCure had built half of Rome 3 times for Cleopatra. He liked to build. This didn't frighten Ivan, it frightened me.
It was his design of the gates, and what happened at the top of the building. None of that was really clear in the screenplay. We had ideas of sort of stuff going on and gargoyles at the top of the building, but he was able to bring it all together very quickly.
So Ivan, on one hand, didn't want to spend the money that John DeCure always wanted to spend to build. On the other hand, Ivan hated having to depend on how the special effects locked him down. So you couldn't turn the camera around because every time it's another effect shot. If you could build it, it made you a lot more freedom in shooting.
And the freedom was very important with people like Dan Aykroyd, Harold Ramis, Bill Murray. There were these remarkable, inventive actor-writers.
And there was so much shooting to be done up there. Ivan felt if we could build this thing, just throw in some razzle-dazzle special effects later, but if we could build the heart of it so I could shoot from all angles and make it. And John DeCure took on that challenge.
It was in one of the largest stages in Los Angeles, stage 16, on the Burbank lot. Shelley Cohn, actually, the editor, once told me a story, and I didn't believe him, where he said, you know, that stage got so big because William Randolph Hearst was doing a movie. They took an existing stage and they lifted it up and built underneath it. And I thought, this is the silliest story I've ever heard. And then about 2 days later, I was watching a documentary on television about Hearst, and it showed them doing it. There was newsreel footage of them lifting this stage and making it a story higher.
This tremendous sound stage is too small to hold the big ensembles planned by Warner Brothers for Cain and Mabel, a new musical production. So they're making it 35 feet higher.
So now the stage is 96 feet tall, and he filled that his set went right to the top.
First time we walked on that set, it was like, wow, really spent some money on this thing.
Even Steven Spielberg came down to look at this set, which was very unusual because he was used to working on his own humongous stages.
We had a press release for the set. I mean, it was an amazing set.
That was a peak day, go in and say, look at what they built, and and it just taught me, you can write anything and they'll build it. All it takes is time and money.
Man, I've never seen anything so ambitious in a movie. I mean, it was so beautiful, first of all. And I thought, wow, I'm really in a movie here, you know?
I just remember climbing up because we had to shoot some of the electricity plates and climbing up by, wooden ladder. There was initials and dates. And I said, oh, if you're up here, you get carve your initials and dates. And the person, the stagehand who had taken us up there gave me this huge dirty look. And he said, those are initials of people that had fallen out of the perms.
So it was a very big set, filling up a stage. There was almost no room to move. On top of that, we were always smoking it up and adding wind. So it was a desperate place to be sometimes.
They wanted to bring the Statue of Liberty out of the East River, for one thing, which they wound up doing in that second one. And instead it was the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man.
Yeah, I mean, the Marshmallow Man. I don't even, and how Danny thought that up.
Stay Puft Marshmallow Man was there from the beginning.
The Marshmallow Man occurred halfway through Dan's original draft, and things got bigger from there.
When I actually started on the picture, there was a number of drawings done already. So there was kind of an idea. We know it's a sailor. We were going with the idea of a guy in the suit, which I think made Ivan really nervous.
Linda Frobos had gotten a job on Ghostbusters. She was sculpting, and they asked her if she knew someone who could build a Marshmallow Man and play it. She knew I'd done Shakespeare, so it was an obvious lock. The drawings were already done. The designers had developed images, and they knew how they wanted it to look. They had me do some maquettes.
The sculpting made it look kind of silly, and we made it fatter. I mean, we thought the fatter it was, the funnier it got.
The first suit that we made was soft foam throughout. The whole crew was very excited about that first test because it was 80% there. But there was one little problem, that as it walked toward the camera, my legs were squeezing the foam together and it looked like a vagina. We had to change that. So we spent some time thinking about ways to firm it up. John Berg came in as a consultant, and he recommended that we make a fiberglass body, and that frightened me. I didn't want it to be a fiberglass body. I didn't want to wear a fiberglass body. I didn't want to have my arms straight out to the side, cutting on the edges and things like that. So I worked with some other foams, and we got some, and we developed it. The L200 internal structure that we eventually used, that was the right one.
We showed the test that we all thought was great. But remember, this is like a styrofoam, yellow foam taped suit with the head on it. It just wasn't painted, wasn't finished to look like Marshmallow. And that's when Ivan said, I can't believe it. I'm basing my whole movie on this thing. I remember he was nervous a lot of the time because nobody ever did anything like this.
He was risking a joke on something very different. And Noah's career wouldn't end, but he would be judged by it if it didn't work.
It's either going to work or we're never going to work again.
But there was only weeks before doing it in which we were crossing our fingers, saying, geez, I hope this works, because if it doesn't work.
And I got to give him credit. I mean, they're committed. It's got to work.
There was a discussion as how big should the Marshmallow Man be?
Yeah, right.
It was a big mystery, how big the Marshmallow Man was supposed to be and going to be.
150 feet, 200 feet.
Somebody had said 125 and somebody had said 100.
Ivan just said, okay, I'll tell you how tall he is. He's 112.5 feet. That's how tall. That's it.
When you get artists together, you just start to work off each other, which is the beauty of Team Marshmallow Man. We had Linda Frobos, who did most of the sculpting of the faces, and then myself and a couple of other really great folks that were to assist Bill in the construction of it.
And there were just these sheets of foam, just big sheets of foam. People were cutting the foam, they were drawing out lines, and they were cutting them in specific angles to get the right, spheres. So it's almost like pattern making. Like you pattern make a dress.
It had to have a zipper so that the performer could get in and out. So the zipper was always on the off-camera side so that any angle that they shot, he looked seamless.
So there were all these multiple suits and there were layers and layers of foam, which when people were exhausted, they would go and sleep on. And because we'd be working all night.
I looked out through the mouth. So it was about 6.5 feet tall because I'm only 5'8". If I were taller, I would have had to use more foam.
The inside of the real head was made out of fiberglass, and there would have been the eyes in it and mechanisms to, make the cheeks go up or maybe make the mouth open.
The really fun thing was I puppeteered the Stay Puft Man's mouth. So that was the really coolest job.
Discovery face, eyes to the right. 1 and 2 and 3 and go.
There was a foam spring belt inside that when I moved, there was a little bit of action transferred to the outside.
He was always talking with the DPs about, how to make sure that, that Stay Puft Man loft looked just right.
The direction is we need you to look really heavy because you're really big, but really light because you're a marshmallow. So it's like, what?
As I was walking, I would say, boom, 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 in order to time it properly, and we were overcranking so that when played back, it looked slower. They would tell me how fast they needed it, take that down by X percentage, and then I'd try to translate that into a version of boom, boom, boom.
Filmed this guy at 72 frames a second. What we ended up with was something, an animation walk cycle called a double bounce walk, something that Mickey Mouse did. Looked really silly, sort of 30s cartoon thing.
When we were in the thick of it, and deadline was just coming down, and it was very stressful, like, are we gonna make it, are we gonna make it? I'm driving down Crescent Heights towards Sunset, and I see a Ghostbusters billboard. And the date that it's gonna open is in like 3.5 weeks or so. It's like 3 weeks, I don't know, it was really soon. And we still hadn't shot the street scene. We still hadn't shot Stay Puft on Fire. I'm pretty sure we hadn't shot the building blowing up. And there was the billboard, and it was like, how is that gonna happen?
I was afraid it was gonna be ridiculously hot inside the suit. And it was, except that because it was hollow and flexible, when I waved my arms, I got air in and out of my mouth.
Imagine that you got a big sheet of foam like in your mattress, and you have to live in there under hot, hot, hot lights. And it's a giant foam thing, and then you have to walk and sort of dance in it. And you have to do that over and over and over again, and it's foam, and you sweat. And you're inside this thing day after day after day.
Look at some of the backstage photos. Sometimes you'll see my assistants like this.
And Bill was a very well-kept guy, but
So there's a scene of me going, oh dear, like this, pretending like it's really bad and really foul, but it wasn't.
He would take that Ghostbusters head off, and it was like, woo, baby, and they did actually some really great things on Ghostbusters where they made it safe for him by putting air conditioning, like literally we would shove an air conditioning tube up his butt, to make sure that he was cool inside the suit.
So the interesting thing for me about the size of the Marshmallow Man was setting the scale of the miniature so that we could build the environment around him. We built a miniature of Central Park West with the road and a bit of the park beside it for the Marshmallow Man to march up.
And there was a split down the middle of that set, and it was a big set, very long street set. And so as Bill walked down that street, the cables followed him, and we were pushed underneath the stage on a little wooden dolly that they'd made for us with a monitor that also had the cable running down. And we were puppeteering as they rolled us down. So it was very sort of, low tech, did the job. And quite frankly, it's one of my favorite movie memories, I think, because there we were, you had your monitor, it was happening above you, and you could hear Bill stepping above you, and you could see it, and you were, puppeteering, and you really felt like you were in it. And somebody was pushing you. It was fun,
This was a storyboard that was originally drawn for it that showed a police car getting crushed, and we were ready to do that, and we had actually started on that, but decided not to do it. Or we were also joking about maybe the Marshmallow Man could pick up his foot and you'd see the squashed police car embedded in the bottom of his foot. It would have been kind of fun. The only time I can really remember in my career where the production designer of the film, in this case John DeCure, provided construction drawings of the miniatures to build. It was up to us to create it, and we had to create about the upper 2/3 of it. We didn't build it down to the ground. Enough for the Marshmallow Man to climb on, basically.
And you look in the window and you can see, actually they had characters in there and they were doing very interesting things.
If you look in this window, you can see two people getting it on. If you look over here, look at that, look who's in there. We got a picture of I don't know, the agent that they hate the most. His pictures in the window. That's the part that's gonna blow up first.
It is a moment that we all, in those days, looked for. Our own little private set decoration moment.
No, you can't see it on film. That's how they get a lot of the pressure off,
Well, during the earliest phases, I was hoping that we weren't really going to have to burn the suit. I thought there's be some artificial way that we can simulate it. Richard kept saying, no, we're going to light it on fire. What do you think? Now, I didn't do the burns. We had stuntmen. We only made 18 costumes, and we only burnt 17 of them.
Dane Morris had come up with some sort of scalable fire that only lasted for 2 seconds.
I was so busy at that time that I hired Joe Viscoso to help me with Stay Puft. We worked out a way to load him and coat him with flammable material.
And it was the start of some sort of chemical reaction. It was a slow little tiny flame. So the first 2 seconds would actually work in scale, because fire doesn't scale.
Well, the actual EPA came in and talked to us about the different environmental hazards of everything we were doing. And it put the fear of God in me. I mean, foam on fire is a dangerous thing, and there's a guy inside the suit, and we had been taught by the EPA that the fumes that were going to be coming out of the suit were dangerous.
It really set off some really noxious gas.
But the guy in the suit, it was very frightening.
It's a hard thing to do, is to get in there and to volunteer having yourself be put ablaze.
First person inside the suit that was just got his stunt card.
Oh yeah,
that
yeah,
Dane
yeah.
was
That's
working
right.
with.
So we had him on a scuba gear with a hose run up his pant leg. He was quite safe inside this suit.
The guy had never done this before. They lit him on fire, and he just sort of got scared and fell to the ground.
We put him out. Ruined one $20,000 suit. So we put him in the suit the next night. Same thing happens, he goes down. Okay, so what's going on? Well, I can't see. I'm afraid of fire. Why did you sign up to do this anyway?
Actually, I think he just couldn't hear.
So that means we're in a panic. We've got one suit left. So there's a guy in town, his name is Tony Caesar. Tony has spent his entire life burning himself up.
A friend of mine called me up and said, I've got this show that we're doing down here in Santa Monica. He said it was a low-budget show, and he needed a fire burn on it and wanted me to come down and do a fire burn on the show. And he wouldn't tell me any more about the show other than that. And I had done some research on it before I went down to see him and found out that it wasn't any low-budget show, and we adjusted my price accordingly.
The suit was built for a guy that was about 6 foot tall. Tony's about 5'4". He's a little guy.
I was more concerned with whenever you catch styrofoam on fire, it tends to completely burn up all at once. So before I got ready to do the fire burn, we took a piece of the foam that the Stay Puft Man was made out of, and we set it on fire, and we seen that the stuff wouldn't burn, which made me feel safe. So I put my fire suit on and was inside the Stay Puft Man.
The action is to walk over to that apple box, step up on it, and slap the top of that church. Yes, sir.
I had to rehearse several times because they wanted me to go up a building a certain way, and they wanted one hand to hit here, one hand to hit here.
We're ready to go. We light him up. He walks over, steps on the apple box, steps up on the thing, slaps the top, backs off the apple box, squats down, stands up again, steps up on the apple box, slaps the top of the church.
And I think it was the second take, the head got hot from the fire on the outside of it, and the head split open, and inside of the suit where I was at was on fire too.
When we finally got him to stop, the pink skull under the Stay Puft was all that was left on his head. The suit had burned clear through to the pyrothane foam.
What happened on the inside, the glue that they used to put it together, all the glue on the inside of the head started burning.
We just stopped, went over, put him out. He said, well, I could have kept going. I wasn't feeling any heat.
Imagine waking up in bed at 2 a.m, looking over my wife and saying, he didn't have his tie on. Joe Viscoso, the pyro guy, he had the bib, and he was loading flash bulbs into the bib and putting squibs on it and little spark generators. And I said, we got to put that tie on there. He said, I don't want to mess it up. I'm going to lean on it, and I just don't want it messed up. So, okay, all right, we'll get it on there. And then you put the guy in the suit and light him up, and then realize a few hours later that one little step got skipped. We had just seen the screening of that shot, and there was applause all around. I had to go to Michael Gross to admit to him that as nice as the shot looked, there was a part missing, and we would have to do it again. And he said, there's so much else going on in that shot. We've got neutrino wands, we've got the guys standing up there, we've got flash bulbs going off. Probably no one will notice it, but if they do, who should I charge the $30,000 reshoot to? I pointed.
Anybody who makes a movie, the first thing they're going to tell you is the most fun is you get to blow stuff up.
So we worked pretty closely with Thane Morris on constructing a blast chamber for the Gozer Temple to go up in.
John had something very specific in mind, and he had these photographs where you saw these plumes that spidered out in these quadrants like that. He drew that on the storyboards.
And it was made so that we could do multiple takes.
The inside of it and all of the framework were quite strong steel.
It was way overbuilt, so there was really no chance it was going to do anything but blow the doors out, which is what we wanted. So Thane could go up and put his bomb inside, and we just stand back and watch him blow up our building.
There was 4 naphthalene bombs in that building.
And so I said, where's the best place to be?
I said, behind me.
I said, great. And I set my camera up, and we had all this acrylic that was for safety purposes, didn't shatter and all that. Here we are, we're getting ready, camera's going, speed, and I'm pressing my camera, and everything explodes. I got smacked right in the forehead.
One of the few times I've ever hurt anybody.
This is where the blood just starts coming down. And what had happened is that this little bench blew up, went in the air, came right to the glass, bounced over, and knocked me right in the head.
The shot he got with his camera was perfect. The crossing fireball with the bench right in front of the camera. Still in focus.
When Ivan saw that, he wanted us to reshoot it because he was actually really pissed. He said, they'd have been killed. I said, well, yeah, isn't that the joke? But here's the drawing. That's when everybody started using storyboards as documents. Hey, we said we're going to do this, and that it looks like that. That's what we did. And so sort of ended up recutting the rooftop scene just before it blows. Each one dives out of the way.
There was a big bag of the shaving cream, and I was going to stand on it, and then it falls on me. I went, well, you know, how much shaving cream is in this thing it's gonna fall on me? And they said, well, you know, I don't know. You know, maybe 75 pounds. And I said, well, wow, that's a lot. And said, well, shaving cream. And I said, well, you know, I remember from junior high school that 75 pounds of feathers and 75 pounds of lead is the same pounds. Okay, Mr. Sensitive, so let's get a stunt guy. Show him that it's all right. So they put the stunt guy underneath, and they opened the shaving cream, and they laid out the stunt guy. Just laid him out. And I said, well, that's what I'm worried about for me.
And Ivan and Joe were up on a truck. They saw me coming and goes, Gross, get up here, this is gonna be great. Get up here, this is gonna be great.
And so they made it a little less, and I went and I did it.
I get up in the truck and they dropped the marshmallow. It's like, it was unbelievable.
And they dumped it on him once.
We had a permit, we got to shoot until I think it was 10 o'clock at night. And at 10 o'clock at night, our best friends, the New York City Police, became our worst enemies. Said, you all right, get this stuff off here. All right, move it, move it. You know, it's just like, shh.
So we decided this movie has to be screened. We're testing cards. This helps the marketing people know where its strengths are. At this point, regardless of that, you've got a finished movie pretty much.
At that time, Seattle, Washington was the place that everybody would go, studios.
Screening is clearly we have a hit. Clearly we have a hit. And we're scoring in the 90s. We're scoring unbelievable. So we run back onto our private jet. We whiz off to go back to LA. Everybody's got a pile of cards. So everybody's going, here's one, best fucking movie ever made. Best movie ever, ever. And we were throwing them in the air deliriously. And realizing, this is good. This is so good.
It was wonderful to see that first screening and to hear the laughs and to just know we had something that the people were going to love.
I really don't remember the first screening of Ghostbusters. I do remember the wrap party, though, but we can't get into that here.
What's cool is that we were there, the crew was there, but there's a lot of people who hadn't seen any of the film. There's administration, there's
The people that worked on the live action often have no idea what the film is going to look like.
I just couldn't believe how good it was and how exciting it was to be a part of it. I mean, and then you wait for the credits.
And that's when we learned that not everyone's names were put in the credits. But wife at the time turned to me and said, so where were you every day for a year? I did. I went. I was there. I worked on the picture.
It was totally random. I submitted a list of everyone who worked in the film.
There were 160 people who worked on Ghostbusters or so that were in the Boss Film sphere of influence. Of those, I think about 100 did not get credit and worked on the film. And I mean, really worked. Like 20-hour days, like 6 or 7 day weeks.
And people who did major things were deleted from the list, and people who did insignificant things were on the list.
For whatever reason, the studio said you could only have so many credits. I don't know if they were running out of letters.
And then we had a wrap party on the beach, and Richard tells me right there, I've taken out an article in Variety, and I've named every single person that worked on Ghostbusters whose name was left off. You know, if he's apologizing to me, he's apologizing to every single person that he left. And I thought that took a lot of integrity.
But I didn't see the movie until I think we premiered it. And I went to the premiere and it was amazing.
I mean, we were just so wide-eyed ourselves. Couldn't believe it. I mean, the Marshmallow Man looked so real to us. We were just like, oh.
The big film of that time that everybody was anticipating was Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. So we were kind of off the radar. When the word started to get out on these test screenings that it was funny, we were shocked as anybody.
But you're driving down the street in your Trans Am and Ray Parker comes on singing because everybody's digging your movie. And it was a great feeling. It was a fun movie to work on.
It was this rough-edged, devil-may-care picture with a lot of great comedy actors and crazy monsters.
When you get people like Dan Aykroyd and Bill Murray, Harold Ramis and Ivan Reitman, all these incredibly funny people that don't have huge egos, that just want to go in and make the best thing they can, They're thinking about every detail, every nuance of the story and the script and the performance and the comedy and the highs and the lows and the arcs. So they get together and they co-create. And I think that group of people co-created a masterpiece.
And the whole town benefited from it. It was stimulating.
We didn't really, I don't think we dare think that that year would be the biggest movie of the year. But we thought it was going to be good. And I think, to be honest, I thought it was going to be classic.
At a certain point, when I think we were #1 at the box office for, I think it went on for 5 or 6 weeks in a row.
It was certainly a good way to start out your career in the movie business.
Robert Gozueta, the ex-chairman and CEO of Coca-Cola, he didn't like the movie until he saw the $250 million blip in their revenues, and he was very happy.
It's hard for me to say because I'm so incredibly competitive, but I thought Ivan did an amazingly good job.
Mixing genres, particularly with comedy, horror comedies, science fiction comedies, are particularly hard to do because one of the genres tends to sort of weaken the other one. And we happen to get away with it.
Even people in the industry who were jealous of us had to go, you got to be happy for these guys.
The empowering message of Ghostbusters is that no matter what monsters we create in the world, that if we have the courage, the tools of the technology, the talent, and the fortitude, we can deal with pretty much anything.
Are you troubled by strange noises in the middle of the night?
You experience feelings of dread in your basement or attic?
If the answer is yes, then don't wait another minute.
Pick up the phone and call the professionals.
Ghostbusters.
We're ready to believe you.